All right. And we're live. What's up, guys? Welcome to the Fantasy Holics Live podcast. We're here for week 3 of our Dynasty chat. So come at us with any questions, comments, concerns, anything you want to talk about fantasy-wise. Let me just get I got to get my ticker up over here. So, Jordan, why don't you take it away while I figure things out here?
Yeah, no, I'm really excited. I think people are starting to talk about football a little bit. We had the schedule come out, so we got a better picture of what this upcoming season's going to look like. So we're going to talk a little bit about the schedule, which is pretty exciting. It's something to talk about right now for sports fans, especially if you're a baseball fan. I know Jerry doesn't really miss any sports that would be going on right now, but if you're a big baseball fan, it's nice to fill in that gap with a little bit of football chat. And we're going to talk a little bit about the schedule. So,
and I'm just looking for. I can't find it. Trying to see how we get the comments up here. For some reason, that's not coming up. So, if anybody's commenting us, got to figure that out.
I'll keep an eye out on it.
Yeah, let me look a little bit longer if you could fill some time.
So we did a few dynasty drafts, mock drafts in the past few weeks. So I'm going to talk about a few guys that I've seen kind of rise over the past few weeks. The first one was a guy that I was really on the fence about when he first got drafted, and that was Antonio Gibson of the Redskins. And I see Ryan's watching, so I'm sure he'll have some words in regards to Antonio Gibson. But, I'm really on the fence on whether he's going to see a legitimate role in that Redskins offense or if he's just going to be more of a gadget player. They still have AP there who's going to garner some touches. They have Darius Geis, who is supposed to have been the lead back the past 2 seasons now, but has dealt with injuries pretty consistently. So, I don't know. I'm kind of in the middle right now. I've seen him. He was going more in the 3rd round in a lot of mocks, but he's been one of those guys that, it was really that comment. Ron Rivera said that Antonio Gibson could be Christian McCaffrey-like. And to me, that is really bizarre that a statement like that could raise his ADP by 10 to 15 spots in dynasty formats. And I think people blow comments like that out of proportion. I mean, number one, Ron Rivera is not going to come out publicly and say, oh, Antonio Gibson sucks. He's going to have no role in this offense. So that's number one. Number two, when he says Christian McCaffrey-like, that doesn't mean he's going to be Christian McCaffrey long-term. Maybe he's going to catch passes out of the backfield. He's a pretty speedy back, kind of built similarly, not as jacked as Christian McCaffrey, but a similar build. So just because he's a Christian McCaffrey-like player doesn't mean he's Christian McCaffrey. So I still don't have a lot of faith in that offense either until we see more out of Dwayne Haskins. So that's a name I've been kind of monitoring. And, I've seen him go early second now in rookie drafts. And to me, I think you get past those top few running backs, and I've started to see some of those mid-tier rookie running backs climb up rankings simply because I think people need running backs and they start to reach on them a little bit. I'll personally take the value of, Michael Pittman, T. Higgins, Ayuk, guys like that. But I've seen a lot of people start to reach on P. Ryan, Gibson, and I'm all about the value in any. I play fantasy basketball, baseball, football. To me, it's always a value play, and I'll rarely reach on a guy unless I have that much confidence in him.
Yeah, I mean, if I could get Gibson a little bit later on in the rookie draft, I think I will. But just because he has the running back tag designated to him, he's going to be going a little bit higher than what I like. I'm still going to give Darius Geis a chance. I'm still going to put some stocks into him. AP's still there. They're not going to give him the ball. So I'm not really touching a lot of Redskins this year. But if I had to take one, I'm probably going to go with Darius Geis and give him another chance. Lucas, we got a question from Lucas. He asked, hey guys, who's your number one player you're targeting this offseason in Dynasty? So I'm not thinking it has to necessarily be a rookie. Jordan, I'll let you go first, answer this question, and then I'll think of mine.
So, the guy that I'm really high on is Miles Sanders, I guess, first and foremost. So there's a couple approaches I think you can take to this. So number one, I've been pretty vocal in saying he only had a 52% snap percentage last year, and he still had almost 1,400 yards from scrimmage. So if Jordan Howard's not there, Darren Sproles isn't going to get touches anymore. I really think that he can increase his workload by 20%. I know there's been some rumblings that Carlos Hyde might get signed there, potentially Devonta Freeman. And to me, I really hope so because I think that's just going to drive his price down a little further. And honestly, those guys don't scare me. I think that he's still a really talented player, and I think that he'll still get his touches. Another name that comes to mind as well, I'll give you two more names. Number one is Kareem Hunt, who I talked about a little bit last week. I think right now, even though he's a compliment to Nick Chubb, I still think he's a number one running back for a team. So after he's done with the Browns this season, I expect him to get a starting gig somewhere. So if you can get a guy at a flex price that has the potential to be an RB1 in future seasons, I think that's huge. I'm also a big fan of Deontay Johnson of the Steelers. He really came on towards the end of last season, was a top 17 wide receiver for the last 5 weeks. Big Ben's going to be back. He's going to want to stretch the field a little bit, and that's where Deontay Johnson comes in. So those are the first three names that come to my mind.
Yeah, for me, Josh Jacobs is one that I seem to be getting a lot, especially just in a lot of mock drafts that we do and a couple dynasties that we have that we started. I've been getting a few later picks, so I've been getting him at the end of the first or right at the turn. So I like him a lot this year. I think he's going to be good in that offense. And as far as like wide receivers go, everybody's like targeting Chris Godwin. He's even sneaking his way into the first round in dynasty drafts, and especially in the later part of the first round. I'm still liking Mike Evans, even though Tom Brady doesn't quite have the cannon that Jameis Winston has, and so a lot of the deep balls, the stuff that Mike Evans is better at, he might not get it this year, or as long as Brady's there, but I'm thinking he's dropping more. Mike Evans is dropping more into. He's still going in like the second round, but you could get him at like the second, third round turn. And I like him in that spot, and he's still a number one on that team, regardless of if Chris Godwin is there taking targets or not.
And I think that's reasonable. I think the number one concern short term in Tampa Bay is just there's a lot of mouths to feed. So, especially with Gronk coming back, who I don't think he's going to command as many targets as people think. I mean, I guess people are forgetting the last time Gronk played, he was extremely injury prone. So I don't expect him to have as much of an impact as Mike Evans or anyone else in that offense. But Mike Evans I've seen drop quite a bit, and we talked about trading a little bit last week, and I'm always targeting guys whose value are low, buy low candidates, and you never sell a guy when he's at his lowest value. But if you can buy a guy like Mike Evans, I remember we did a mock maybe a month ago now, and Mike Evans went pick 13 overall in a dynasty draft. And now, yeah, I mean, you're right. I've seen him go in the third round now, and that's definitely – I'm not the biggest Mike Evans fan, but he's been very consistent throughout his career. And, I mean, in the third round, he offers great value. He's definitely a top 10 wide receiver.
I mean, he's had over 1,000 yards every year of his career so far. So you can't deny his talent. I mean, he's still gonna get his targets. He's still gonna get his yards. Dan, you are correct. Godwin is the better player in PPR leagues. That's gonna be. I mean, Godwin's probably gonna be Brady's go-to guy. He's gonna be like the Julian Edelman type, catching balls from Tom Brady. But I mean, you can't just eliminate Mike Evans from your game plan. You're not going to do that. Gronk's going to come in and take some targets. They still, as of right now, they still have OJ Howard and they still have Cameron Brate. But I mean, Mike Evans he's a 13th overall pick. He's not going away at all. And then Lucas also mentioned he said personally think it might be the lowest that you could buy Odell right now. I mean, I agree. And especially like in the leagues that I'm in, the dynasty leagues that I'm in, it's every day somebody's saying, "Hey, Odell's on the block" or something like that. So, I mean, I haven't put out any offers for him, but you could definitely get Odell cheap right now.
Yeah, no, and that's kind of funny because I have an article tomorrow morning coming out about Odell Beckham because he said last week that he was going to have his best season yet, which I don't think that's necessarily true. But when I did my projections, I have him as my eighth ranked wide receiver in PPR formats, and he's been going right around the 15th, 16th wide receiver overall in a lot of drafts. So, I mean, that's great value, and you can't discount how talented he is. I know he has a big mouth, and maybe that deters people from him. He didn't have the greatest season last year, but he was still a strong asset, and there's no denying his talent. And it was only a few years ago that he was really dominant with the Giants. He didn't have as many people to share targets with. Probably Reuben Randall was his biggest threat then, but. He's still one of the most, just from a pure talent standpoint, he's still one of the most talented wide receivers in the league. And I personally believe we saw Baker at his worst last year, and he's only going to get better.
Yeah, and going off of that too, you have with all the rookies coming in too, kind of knowing their landing spots and where you're picking in your rookie draft, or even if your rookies are included in your regular draft, Odell's just going to keep on dropping because people are taking rookies over him too. It's crazy. Like Odell still has all the talent in the world. He's still gonna get his targets, and I mean we're not gonna see Baker Mayfield have a season like he had last year. I think Baker's gonna be one of the more improved players this year, but that only helps Odell's case. But they got a lot of targets there too. Just went out and got Austin Hooper. They still got Jarvis Landry. They got the two-headed monster of running backs in the backfield. So I mean you can't just focus on one guy. So Odell's gonna get open and he's gonna get his targets.
Yeah, that's my biggest concern, definitely, is the targets. And Kevin Stefanski last year with the Vikings. The Vikings had the third fewest pass attempts last season and were second in the league in rushing offense. So I'm really interested. He comes from Gary Kubiak was his mentor in Minnesota last season. Gary Kubiak historically has been a little more balanced than the Vikings were last season. So I'm really interested to see how Stefanski's offense plays out this year. If Baker's only throwing as many times as Kirk Cousins did last year, I think that would really hurt him a ton too. So, and I also think people have said that Joku is going to be a trade target. I actually don't think so. I think the reason they went out and got Hooper and they keep Joku is so they can run more two tight end sets. And I think they're going to be more of a run heavy team. But we'll see how it shakes out. I hope for fantasy purposes that they don't have as few pass attempts as the Vikings did last season.
All right. Dan comes in with a question. He says, with the possibility of players being quarantined for 2 weeks in the middle of the season, how do you think your draft strategy changes? I mean, honestly, and personally, I haven't really heard of that yet, so I haven't really thought about it. Have you seen anything about that?
No, so I mentioned this kind of briefly last week. I think that it impacts players and new teams the most, and then rookies the most. So if you think of a guy like DeAndre Hopkins in a redraft league, I think that the quarterback, wide receiver, just overall connection and rapport that they build is one of the most underrated aspects of just football in general. There's a lot of, when you talk about Tom Brady and Julian Edelman, they just had a connection that was built over years and over repetition. So I think a guy like DeAndre Hopkins could be affected. Not that I'm saying don't draft DeAndre Hopkins, and I personally have been saying I don't think he's a top 5 wide receiver for this upcoming year, but I think a guy like that, when you talk about rookies, they're not going to get that full training camp experience, and that goes for running backs and wide receivers that are rookies. So they're not going to get to build rapport with their teammates. They'll get to learn the playbook, but there's one thing when you get to learn the playbook and actually executing it. So I think you might see a lot of rookies struggle early on. So me personally, I'm not going to be reaching on a lot of rookies in redraft leagues this year. Obviously, for dynasty formats, it doesn't really impact much.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's we got to see what happens when when all this quarantine stuff is over and how they could get back to playing, and if even the preseason's shortened or the regular season shortened, anything like that. But we'll see what happens. So while we got no questions coming in,
a lot of quarterback. I'll mention quickly. I think a lot of quarterback competitions may be drastically affected. So if you talk about, the first one that comes to mind is Nick Foles and Mitch Trubisky in Chicago. To me, I would give the edge to Mitch Trubisky if there's not a training camp. It's going to be really hard for Nick Foles to learn that offense and really get acclimated with his surroundings if he's not able to practice with his teammates. So I think there might be a few quarterback competitions that get affected as well.
The big quarterback competition of Tua and Ryan Fitzpatrick.
Not a competition. It's all Ryan Fitzpatrick.
It's Tua's job, but Ryan's going to be there for a little bit. Is there another wideout that matters for fantasy in Green Bay, like Funches or MVS? Any interest in these guys or someone else Personally, I'm a fan of Funches. I was a fan of Funches last year. I went out and got him in a couple leagues last year with the assumption that Andrew Luck was going to be there and that he was going to be a good number two to T.Y. Hilton. Obviously, he got injured, got hurt, and then yeah, I mean, and then that didn't work out, and Andrew Luck ended up retiring before the season started. So all my Devin Funches shares went to waste. But I'm I'm giving him another chance this year. We got a Green Bay fan that's in our admin group. He's not a big fan of Funches, but he doesn't want to root against them. I mean, that's understandable. It's his team. Thinking along the stat lines of maybe like 750, 850 yards, and maybe I'm thinking like 7, 8 touchdowns. That's a solid wide receiver two numbers, something that you could put in your flex or so. Not wide receiver two numbers, wide receiver two numbers for the team, but solid flex numbers for him. So I like Devin Funches, and as we know, MVS does have he has a little bit of a chemistry with Aaron Rodgers there. So he's somebody that you could get later. In a lot of the mocks that I've done, I haven't really seen him go at all. So he might be somebody there that's hanging out on the waiver wire after drafts are done. But I mean, if you're looking for like consistent numbers, probably not, because they still have Jay Sternberger, the tight end. They got Aaron Jones. They went out and got AJ Dillon in the draft. But I mean, if you want to take a chance on somebody, Devin Funches, he has been a number one before in this league with Carolina, so now he doesn't have that pressure with Devontae Adams there. I'd take a stab at him in later rounds.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll first say that calling Devin Funchess a wide receiver one is, I
He
guess that's
was
a
in
loose.
Carolina.
You use wide receiver one very loosely there. I mean, I'm not the biggest Devin Funchess fan. I personally, I mean, it depends. Once again, it's all about the value for me. I think the Packers want to be more committed to the run. And I think you see that they already had Aaron Jones. They still have Jamal Williams there. They went out and got A.J. Dillon. I guess the only thing I can say on a positive note for Funchess is the fact that they didn't draft a wide receiver. I guess that shows they have some confidence in their current core of guys that they have. So to me, it's too crowded to take a chance on them early. You know, if Funchess goes there with one of my last few picks and there's nobody else there that I like, I might take a chance on him. But once again, if there's no training camp, that could be the perfect example of a guy that's impacted. If he doesn't get to build rapport with Aaron Rodgers, but not a guy I'm reaching on. But if he's there at a good spot, I'll take him. Unenthusiastically, though.
What do you think about Joe Mixon? Can Joe Mixon be a top five back this year?
I mean, so you and I have had quite a few back and forths about Joe Mixon. I called him overrated today, which was a joke, just for the record. He's not overrated. He's fine. But yeah, I mean, I think that he can be a top five back. I've said before, in PPR formats, the only thing that concerns me is that he's just not on the field for third downs, and he doesn't get a ton of catches. Gio Bernard, who I'm a big fan of, is a really great third down back now in the NFL. He's a good pass blocker, a good pass catcher. So, I mean, if Mixon gets more of those I just think it's tough in today's climate. If you're not a pass-catching back, and I say this, and Derrick Henry was a top five guy last year, so he would need crazy volume, Joe Mixon. But I just don't think he's personally on the field enough to be a surefire top five guy. Would it surprise me? No, but his lack of catches kind of concern me. So, not that I wouldn't draft him. I think I have him as my RB7, so it's not a stretch to say he moves up a few spots.
I mean, he's definitely making the most of his opportunity when he's getting it. I think there was a stat or there was a graphic the other day, and I think I might have showed it to you, that Joe Mixon was number 3 or 4 in total touches over the past 2 years. I mean, and that's with names like Zeke. And other names on the list, I forgot who they were, but I definitely think he could be a top. I think he could be a top five back. And the one thing that you think about when you're talking about Cincinnati, what's the first thing that you think about when somebody asks a question about Cincinnati? It's their offensive line, and they've improved that. So Joe Mixon, he's only going to be better. I think he could sneak into the top five. He's still going to be, I mean, you still got C-Mac up there, you still got Barkley up there, but he is one of their top weapons. I mean, we got A.J. Green coming back. Tyler Boyd is there. Who knows how effective John Ross is going to be. And then Joe Burrow, I mean, he's going to be he's going to be getting the ball to his running back out of the backfield, if that's Gio Bernard, if that's Joe Mixon, but they're going to be heavily used in this offense. And I think Joe Mixon will get the volume that he needs to be a top five back. What are your thoughts on Curtis Samuel this year?
So I think he fits in pretty well with what the Panthers are doing. I think Teddy Bridgewater's going to help that offense out tremendously. I personally am a big fan of DJ Moore. I think he fits into that Joe Brady offense mold perfectly. You have Robbie Anderson stretching the field. I think it'll be just interesting to see how that whole offense shakes out. Once again, that's a guy I'm not necessarily reaching on. I think he's more of like a third wide receiver on a team, maybe your fourth wide receiver in fantasy. But I think that the wide receivers that they do have in that core really mesh well together. They have a speedy guy. They have DJ Moore, who is a little more of an underneath player, and then Robbie Anderson, who can stretch the field. So I think they all have their distinct roles. I don't expect any of them to be consistent starters, though, except DJ Moore.
Yeah, I'm with you too. I mean, DJ Moore is obviously the clear cut number one there. And then it's between Anderson and Curtis Samuel. It's like a 2A, 2B, and that's one of the offenses that uses their running back a lot out of the backfield. Obviously, we've seen it with McCaffrey the past 2-3 years. So I think he'll put up solid numbers. He's kind of in that. I would rank him above Devin Funches, but he's kind of in that Devin Funches area where you got that number one that is going to be doing his number one stuff, and then he's going to give you some good games, and he's also going to give you some bad games. But yeah, he's definitely up there. He's a solid like mid-round pick in redraft and in dynasty. Robbie Anderson played with Matt Rule in college, and it's just interesting to see how much he favors him in play calls.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing there, too, is when you look at Teddy Bridgewater's statistics, he's never been known to stretch the field. And I've said I don't know if that's a matter of he doesn't have the arm strength, which I think that he does, or it's just a product of the offenses he's been involved in. Have they not really unleashed Teddy and let him throw the ball downfield? So I'll be interested to see that Robbie Anderson, Teddy Bridgewater connection, and if they unleash him a little bit.
And Dan mentioned that Derrick Henry's on a contract year, and those backs usually play harder in their contract year. I mean, yeah, they only have pretty much one chance at a huge contract. That's just the reality for running backs nowadays. Teams are drafting them a little bit early to try to, not in this case this year, we only had one running back go in the first round, but to get that fifth-year option. But it's usually, okay, thank you for your 4 years of service. Now we're going to go find somebody else. So we'll see what Derrick Henry does this year. If he could duplicate last year, help the Titans get to the playoffs again. That AFC South is wide open, so all possibilities are there. How do we feel about the Howard?
Yeah,
sorry.
No, go ahead. You're fine.
Well, if you're going to touch on Henry, I'll let you finish up.
Yeah, no, I would just say, once again, Derrick Henry is one of those guys. His value has kind of been interesting to monitor in mock drafts as well. He was a top 5 back last year, and he's going to get the volume. The Titans and what Mike Vrabel is building there is all about a tough run game, a good defensive front. So, he's going to get his touches, but I consistently see him going right around RB 10, 11, 12. And to me, as much as I'm not the biggest fan of Derrick Henry, and, I kind of mentioned it with Joe Mixon, and the same goes for Derrick Henry. He doesn't really catch any passes, but the volume is going to be there, and their entire offense runs through him. So, if he ends up going around, I've seen him go like late second in a lot of drafts. I think that's really good value, and I would be really scared if I saw one of those top 2 teams in the draft get Barkley and McCaffrey, and then all the way back they get Derrick Henry. That's a really scary thought. So I'm going to be interested to monitor his value.
Yeah, he's typically a guy I really don't like to put my hands on, and he's proven me wrong plenty of times. But in the playoff rounds 2 years ago, he showed up, and he won a lot of leagues. And then last year, he was just pretty consistent all year. But I'm not a huge fan of bigger body backs, and it's like at any moment you think that they're going to wear down, and I personally just don't want to take that chance as much as it might bite me in the ass later on. It's not the kind of back that I want to go for. So I'm just going to let somebody else have them. But how do we feel about the dynamic duo in Miami, the Jordan Howard and Matt Breida duo? Ryan thinks it's going to be a 50-50 split. What do you think?
Yeah, I think they both have pretty clear and defined roles. You'll have Jordan Howard as the goal line back, most likely on first and second downs. I really have always liked Matt Breida. I thought he was very underrated with the 49ers, and when he was healthy and had the opportunity to get consistent snaps, he averaged over 5 yards a carry the past 2 seasons. So he's shown explosive ability, and he's just one of those guys. When I watched him play. I just thought he was more talented than he got credit for. So I think that in PPR formats, Matt Breida finishes with more points, and I've seen him going after Howard, and I really see Breida getting around 60 or so catches. So I think it's something to monitor as the season goes along. But I've always liked Breida, and I've gotten him a few times in mocks as my fourth running back, right in like that 10th round range. And I really like him in that spot, and I think he's kind of like James White. He's always undervalued because you're like, I don't want James White, but he's like a top 20 back in PPR formats every single year, and he's going as the 35th running back off the board. So I kind of view Breida that way, and I think he's even more explosive than James White is.
Yeah, that backfield might be the most difficult backfield to guess and to pick which player you want from that backfield. It's like you almost pretty much have to take them back to back in consecutive rounds if you want to draft them. And it's like, who do you draft first? Do I go Howard now and then Breida later, or as soon as Howard goes, Breida might go a couple picks after you? I mean, it's so difficult to predict how that's going to go. And I agree with Ryan. I think it is going to be a 50-50 split. Howard had a little bit more value before the draft happened. I mean, obviously Breida wasn't traded to there until the day 2 or day 3 of the draft, but Howard had all the after day 1 ended of the draft. Howard had, like, I think his value was the highest because they didn't draft anybody with one of their 3 picks, and then the next couple rounds of the draft comes along and Breida gets traded there. So now it's like, okay, now who's the number one? What are they going to do? Howard's more of the goal line, third down back, punch it in. Breida's the better pass catcher. So, but it's like you don't trust any of them to be your like clear cut RB2, but you kind of want to share both of them, and it's hard to. It is going to be a 50-50 split, and it's down in Miami. They're still rebuilding, so who even knows how much they're going to be able to run the ball.
Yeah, no, I still think it's a matter, too, of just what kind of format you're in. That's why I always try to differentiate between PPR and I say specifically PPR. It seems like I'm in the minority here, but I actually still play in quite a few standard leagues. And I saw a poll on Twitter the other day where it's still 50-50. So even though I think PPR leagues are trendy, there's still a lot of traditional leagues out there. So I favor Breida and PPR and Howard and standard.
All right. Is Chris Thompson a sleeper? He signed with Jacksonville. He's back with Jay Gruden, who got him involved in the passing game with the Skins. And Fournette caught a lot of balls last year. Plus, this could be Fournette's last year. I think as like a short-term play, he could be a sleeper going into this year. They didn't address that need in the draft. They didn't trade Fournette away. They still got Raekwon Armstead there, he's a solid cuff. I mean, he was probably going to be one of the top 5 cuffs before they signed Chris Thompson. Now Chris Thompson kind of juggles up that backfield, but I think he is a solid sleeper. I don't know how it's one of those things where we just don't know how long. I mean, could he take over the number 1 or even split time next year if Fournette leaves? Could Fournette be traded before the season even starts? Who knows how that backfield looks when they finally kick off. But yeah, I mean, they didn't address the backfield in the draft, and they didn't really address it in free agency aside from Chris Thompson. So he's definitely going to get some playing time there in Jacksonville this year.
Yeah, and I really liked Chris Thompson in Washington, and I think some people forget how explosive he was, and he had a really good stretch with them a few years back before his leg got shattered into 100 pieces. So, I mean, he's a guy that's really explosive and has a lot of talent, so I'm not exactly sure what kind of role he's going to have there. I'd say in PPR formats, he's a super, super deep sleeper because he's more of a third down running back who can catch balls out of the backfield. If anything, I think it lowers Fournette's value a little bit. I mean, Fournette had almost 80 catches last year, so I don't think I think that was an anomaly. I don't think that's going to happen again. So I think if anything, it hurts Fournette's value long term. I mean, not to mention that offense is just kind of terrible. I don't know if I necessarily am confident in saying I want anyone in the run game there. I like Minshew this year. I think for a few reasons, because Jay Gruden has a very pass-heavy scheme. And number 2, I think they're going to be down a lot, and they're going to get a lot of garbage points for you. So I don't think that's going to help their backfield, though, for fantasy purposes.
Yeah, it's another one of those like Miami situations. I mean, just off the top of my head, aside from Fournette, who's the best running back that's in the state of Florida right now between Tampa, Jacksonville, and Miami? It's like who would you go with? Who would you pick right now? Leave Fournette out of it. Who would you take out of all the running backs down in Florida?
Oh man. So I mean, I guess I would probably say Matt Breida then. I don't trust Tampa Bay's backfield enough. I think there's going to be a huge split there. Keyshawn Vaughn being third down. I still think Ronald Jones is going to have a role there. The fact that they didn't take a running back earlier kind of tells me that, and I think Keyshawn Vaughn is there to more be a pass blocker and third down back. So I just like Matt Breida's talent. I think he's really explosive. I think that offense is going to be much improved. It's kind of gone under the radar, but Chan Gailey is their offensive coordinator in Miami now, and he's been known to bring a lot of success for fantasy players. So I guess if I put me at gunpoint, I'd have to pick Breida.
Do we still view, this is a question that came in, do we still view Fournette as a top 10 to 12 back while we're on the topic of the Florida backs?
Yeah, I mean, just by pure volume, I mean, I say that he's going to get less catches than he did last year. I mean, even if he gets 50, which is almost, it's 30, almost 30 less catches than he had last year, he's still going to have a very defined role. There's not many running, and as much as Chris Thompson is explosive in the past, there's not many running backs in today's game where you can say they're the clear-cut number one. And I'm not saying that Armstead or Thompson's going to bite into his carries enough where he's not the clear-cut number one. So I'd still have him probably right around that 10, 11, 12 range. Right, I think that's fair for him just because of the volume he's going to get.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree too. He showed last year that he could stay fairly healthy. He showed last year that he could catch a lot of balls out of the backfield. They're probably going to need to throw a lot this year. He'll get his rushing yards early on in the game, and just towards the end of the game, and when they're in down, I think he's gonna catch some balls. He's gonna get some fantasy points for you, and I think he'll finish right around that RB12 spot. I'm not saying I would take him over Derrick Henry, but I would probably pass on Derrick Henry and hope that I could get somebody like a Fournette a little bit later, or if say like Derrick Henry goes in the early part of the second round, I'd rather have Fournette later on in the second round than taking Derrick Henry where he's going. So, I mean, I still trust him. I trust him as my RB2, and yeah, I think he's going to have a decent year. Yeah, I mean, Dan brings up a good point. He's got to do better than 3 rushing touchdowns, though.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a product of the Jaguars' offense kind of being terrible. So, I mean, he's a big guy. He should be getting more than 3 touchdowns. So that's what I made that point probably about 6 weeks ago with somebody else. Is let's say that he gets 30 less catches this year, but his touchdowns go up. I mean, he's going to finish right about the same as he did last year, in my opinion. So, and not to mention, he's looking to get out. He's looking for a big deal. So that's probably going to motivate him more. So I think he's going to have a good season still.
All right, and then let's jump over to the Saints. Got a similar question to the Miami question. Will Kamara and Murray be a 50-50 split?
So I actually think that's a really interesting question, and I'll preface it first by saying that there's a guy that I talked to who runs SportMed Analytics who actually just this morning came out with something about Kamara, and essentially based on the surgeries that Kamara has, it looks like long-term he's going to have a ton of injury problems. So he's most likely going to be a guy that you're not going to be able to rely on. So I actually think that it could be closer to a 50-50 split than people think. Kamara's still the guy to own because he's going to touch right around 80 catches or so. But I think as far as snap percentage, maybe not necessarily, maybe even carries, I would say, I think it's going to be a lot closer to 50-50 than people think.
Yeah, I mean, I would still lean Kamara there too, but we saw last year Murray. I mean, Murray's been pretty capable of carrying a backfield even if Kamara goes down. You got me saying it, Kamara. It's Kamara. But Murray's been capable of carrying the backfield if Kamara goes down. And but yeah, I mean, it's an older offense there. They got Emmanuel Sanders, Drew Brees, obviously one of the older quarterbacks in the league. Jared Cook, one of the older Cook's still there, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Jared Cook, one of the older tight ends in the league. So, I mean, they're going to be switching out personnel all over the place. And I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Murray's on the field, even with Kamara. But he's gonna get a lot of touches. Let me see here. Who's the better back to own in Dynasty, Benny Snell or McFarland?
I would say pretty with a lot of certainty McFarlane. I didn't really like what I saw from Benny Snell last year. I don't think he really showed an ability to be a starting running back. I think McFarlane has more potential. I think he's more explosive. I mean, I still think that James Conner is being underdrafted, and I think he might have more of a role than any of us anticipate. But I think McFarlane's the most explosive between those two, so I see him carving out more of a role. And not to mention, Snell doesn't really catch passes, and that hurts you in PPR leagues as well.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with McFarland, but I'd also have to add on that I probably don't want to touch anybody in the Pittsburgh backfield. Jalen Samuel showed a little bit last year. James Conner, he's obviously got the internal health issues, and then they went out and drafted a running back last year and a running back this year. So, I mean, you got too many running backs in the backfield there. Maybe one of them gets cut in preseason or whatever the preseason is going to bring. But yeah, I mean, they're not going to not use any of those guys. So I don't. I mean, if Connor falls into the middle of the second round, maybe, but he's typically an end of the first, early second round kind of guy. So that's a little bit too rich for me. Kamara is another back that's on a contract year. Is that? Do you know if that's true or not?
I believe it is, yep.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, so he's got something to prove too. Let's talk schedule. What do you say we talk schedule?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about this schedule.
So the schedule came out last week, Thursday. There's been a lot of rumors about the schedule too. I think like even a day or two before the schedule came out, there was some leaks saying that the first 4 games are going to be the cross conference games in case they had to cancel or push back anything, and then like we weren't going to get divisional games until later on in the season. But turns out that was completely false. A lot of good matches on the first week of the schedule. The season opens up on Thursday night, September 10th, with the Texans visiting the Chiefs. Could be a good matchup. I mean, it's one of those things where the Texans they made it to the playoffs last year. They made it to the second round last year. They actually had a pretty decent lead over the Chiefs in that playoff game before Patrick Mahomes came back. But they're like, I don't know. I mean, they're losing that. A lot of people are sleeping on them, but it's because they lost their best player. They still have Deshaun Watson. They still have a pretty studly defense, and they got a better running game now. I mean, if David Johnson could return to any kind of form or even half the form that he was a couple years ago, that's pretty much open or solidifies one spot there. And they went out and got Brandon Cooks, and they brought in Randall Cobb. None of them are going to replace DeAndre Hopkins, but they have. I mean, Watson has wide receivers to throw to, but it's just like that one move, that one trade of DeAndre Hopkins just kind of brings the morale of anything that we want Houston to do just go down. And I don't know. I mean, I think it's going to be a good game, but I think the Chiefs are going to dominate. It's in Arrowhead. The Chiefs are returning 20 of 22 Super Bowl starters, and they got one of the better running backs that was in the draft. So it's yeah. I mean, what do you think about that game?
So yeah, I kind of agree with your assessment on the Texans. They're one of those teams that everybody is so down on, but I think we forget that they made the playoffs. And I mean, this might seem a little silly to say it out loud, but I actually think that Deshaun Watson is kind of underrated. I mean, he single-handedly takes that team and puts that team into playoff contention. And we're always talking about Mahomes and now Lamar Jackson, and I feel like we really leave Deshaun Watson out of that conversation. And all he's done is put that team on his back and taken them to the playoffs. Now, I think if they had more help, they would be closer to a Super Bowl contender. He's gotten really beat up in his career. He's taken a lot of sacks. Their offensive line is still a little questionable. We'll see if they show any improvement this year.
They've addressed
their
it, but
defense is
a lot of hits.
Yeah, I mean, it's better, but, I never read too much into offensive line signings because, it's like anything else with building rapport. I think that's actually an underrated part of offensive linemen, too. They still have to learn schemes, learn play calls, learn to communicate with their fellow offensive linemen. So it's improved, but we'll see how it comes together. Their defense is, J.J. Watt's older now. He's not the dominant force he once was. So, I mean, well, when he plays, he's still pretty dominant. But, at some point you'd expect that he's going to slow down. But when I was doing my standing projections, I had him tied for last in the division with the Jaguars. And when I looked at that, I'm like, I mean, I don't know why. I mean, I feel like a Deshaun Watson run team isn't going to be that bad just because by himself, and I actually wouldn't expect him to get blown out because I just think he's the kind of guy that by himself he puts you in contention to win a game every single week. So the Chiefs, I think, overall are going to be really hard to beat this year, but I expect Deshaun Watson to put up a fight. And I mean, Bill O'Brien has a lot to prove this season. He's kind of been one of the mockeries of this offseason, so he has a lot riding on this year, and I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't make the playoffs or maybe they made a first-round exit if he was out after this season.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a fun game to watch, and especially if it happens on time, then we know that football is back and on time, and we're going to be everybody's going to be going excited, and all your fantasy leagues and real life leagues are going to be fun. But I don't know. I mean, I agree with what you said about Deshaun Watson. He's still Deshaun Watson. He's the best quarterback in that division. Definitely helps him get to the playoffs, and that division really isn't that strong. I mean, Tennessee has one of the better run games in the league, and they just locked up Tannehill, and AJ Brown is really promising, and we have yet to see what's going to happen with Corey Davis. Might be his last year in Tennessee.
You just wanted to bring up Corey Davis.
Yeah, he's my sleeper this year. Go out and pick him up. I did predict that Devontae Parker was going to have a good year, and that's what I'm thinking about Corey Davis. So if you want some early insight, go take him. And then Indy's pretty strong too. They went out and they got Phillip Rivers. They got one of the best running backs in the draft, and Jonathan Taylor, one of the better wide receivers in the draft too. Michael Pittman to go with T.Y. Hilton to go with Paris Campbell. So I mean but none of those teams are, and then Jacksonville is just hanging out down there in Florida. But none of those teams are really like super dominant. So I mean, if Houston makes it, it's going to be because of Deshaun Watson, but it's probably going to be like a 9-7 record, and he's gonna be completely exhausted by the end of the year because he's gonna be carrying this team on his back. We do have a couple questions.
Yep, and I think I had the Titans and Colts finishing with a tie at 8-8. So
8-8, and one of them winning the division.
Yep.
Or is Jacksonville your sleeper at 13-3?
No, not even a little bit. And I think Deshaun Watson just too, the fact that they're competitive, I mean, it just shows how important the quarterback position is. And that's why I never understand why some teams play around with their quarterback situation so much. So, like the Bears, for example. I mean, Trubisky isn't going to take you to a Super Bowl. I don't know why you play games. Just get rid of him and move on.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of have to. They're paying Foles that big contract that Jacksonville overpaid him for, but they traded for him, so now he's their problem. I still want to talk more about the schedule, so we'll handle these last couple questions and then try to focus on the schedule a little bit. But one question came in is really good. Can you see Diggs outscore OBJ this year?
I mean, I could, but I personally don't think that the Bills' offense is going to be very pass-heavy. And I kind of mentioned that maybe Stefanski is going to bring a more conservative offensive scheme to the Browns as well. But number one, I mean, Beckham's more talented. I think Diggs' skill set matches Josh Allen's really well. So I'm kind of interested to see how that turns out long term, because Diggs is a really good long route runner, and Josh Allen has the big arm. But I think Diggs hasn't really been known for accumulating a ton of catches. So he's more of a guy that gets you 70 catches where Beckham can get you 80, 90. So just from that standpoint, I'd still take Beckham. But I do think it's a good question, though.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to be biased or anything, but I think that Diggs can outscore Odell, and mostly because of the weapons that Cleveland has. I mean, I don't want to make any of my Bills Mafia fans mad because they think that they think that all of our weapons are top-notch studs, but I mean, Diggs is the best weapon that's on the team, and then everybody else, they're good. I mean, John Brown had a 1,000-yard season last year. Cole Beasley is a solid slot guy, but I mean, Diggs is the best wide receiver that we've had since, well, Stevie Johnson, and then before that, Terrell Owens, who was only here for a year. But just because of like all the past targets that they have in Cleveland with the ball going to be spread around, I would probably give the edge to Diggs because he's probably going to get the ball quite a bit more. Well, not quite a bit more, but he's going to have more opportunities here than Odell is. Was Kenyon Drake's, and this one I'll leave this one for you because you're a big Kenyon Drake fan. Was Kenyon Drake's second half with the Cardinals what we can expect from this year, or will he be a bust?
So I think as far as is that what we can expect this year? I mean, I would say no. I mean, he had 800 yards in 8 games and what was it, 8, 9 touchdowns. So I mean, for him to get 1,600 total yards and 16 touchdowns is very unrealistic. As much as I love Kenyon Drake, and I think he's going to have a huge opportunity this year with the Cardinals. I kind of have tempered my expectations a little bit because I talk about value quite a bit. He's the kind of guy that I was starting to reach on a little too much, where I was starting to consider him at that first round turn if I had the last pick. And, that's just too much. I personally think he's always been a talented guy. He kind of got overshadowed. I won't say overshadowed in Miami, but he was hidden in Miami because that organization was so poorly run. So I still think that he's going to finish the year as a top 10 running back. More towards that 8-9 range. So I still think he's worth it in the late second, early third, somewhere in that range. Maybe you're looking more at 1,400 yards and 8 touchdowns with, 40, 50 catches, which is still a good number, but it's unrealistic to think he's going to have 15, 16 touchdowns and 1,600 yards.
Yeah, just to touch on him a little bit, I like him. It's like I think trading David Johnson was the best thing that could happen to him. There still is a solid running back behind him in Chase Edmonds. So if anything were to ever happen to Kenyon Drake, the run game I don't think is going to take a huge hit. But it's Kenyon Drake's backfield. I think he's going to have a solid year. I think where he's going in drafts, it's definitely it's what he's worth. What is it? Most of the time it's mid-second. That's where he's been going. But I mean, yeah, he's an RB1 for his team, a team that you can't just focus just on stopping the run. You can't even focus on just on stopping one guy because Christian Kirk is a solid player. Larry Fitzgerald signed up for another year, and they got DeAndre Hopkins. So the run game is going to be open, and I think that he's going to have a pretty solid year. And he's gonna give you what you're expecting out of an RB2 where he's being drafted, or even your RB1 if you took a wide receiver in the first round. So going back, I mean, if you guys have more questions, definitely fill them in. We're not gonna skip them. It might just take a little bit to get to them. We do want to talk about the schedule a little bit, but yeah, if you guys want to ask more questions, feel free. We're not gonna ignore you. Going back into the schedule though, any games from week 1 that stick out to you the most, or do you want to jump into your first game that you're looking forward to this year?
Yeah, I mean, my first game is from week 1, maybe because I'm a little biased, so don't yell at me. But, I'm just interested to see the Rams play in their new stadium. I think it's very intriguing that it's against the Cowboys, because I could argue that the Cowboys have the best roster in the NFL on paper. And I say on paper specifically because they're the Cowboys and they've really underachieved the past few seasons. But I think I'm a little nervous this season for the Rams overall. I think it's the post-Todd Gurley era. He was only there a few seasons, but I mean, that entire team and their success directly ran through Todd Gurley. So I think this is a big season for Jared Goff to see what he can do as a standalone quarterback. He has a young backfield, a young offensive line, some really solid weapons. But I think this could end up being a really troublesome year for the Rams. So it's either going to be they're a solid team, or I think it could be a full rebuild. So I'm a little curious to see how they play a tough competitive team like the Cowboys, if they live up to it's on Sunday Night Football, so that's intriguing. So we'll see if they can live up to the bill, and if not, I think this could be a very troublesome season for them.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun game, and I mean, within the next couple of years, I want to get out to that stadium because it looks beautiful. Yeah. Definitely want to get out there. I don't care if it's for the Chargers, for the Rams, for a college football game. I want to get out there and see it. But the one game in week 1, so just a little bit of a background. We each took 5 games that we're looking forward to this year. They're not all from the same week. And none of them are the same game. I don't think. I think we talked about that, so you don't have the same games as me. But my first game that I'm looking forward to is from week 1. I actually predicted that it was going to be the Sunday night game, but it ended up not being it. It's the Bucks and Saints, Tom Brady versus Drew Brees for the first matchup. While they're division rivals, I think it's going to be. I mean, those NFC South games for years have given us just fireworks. I mean, pin any two of those teams against each other, and it's like a 40-32 game or 45-42 game. It's just points all over the board, and that's partially because none of those teams know how to play defense, and partially because those teams just put out good offenses. And yeah, so week one, Bucks at Saints. It's in the 4:25 time slot, Eastern time zone, and it's I think it's going to be all that it's hyped up to be. They're going to talk about it on the morning shows. They're going to talk about it on Good Morning Football, on all the pregame shows, and then when they finally play the game, it's going to be points all over the board. The defenses are a little bit better than what they have been. The Bucks still have a weak secondary. The Saints defense is a lot better, but yeah, I mean that game's going to be fun, and I can't wait to see the points back and forth. Who's your next?
Yeah, and it's
Oh,
kind of
sorry.
funny. So I actually had Tampa Bay and New Orleans the second time. I made more than five matchups because I was just going through the schedule and seeing what games intrigued me. But they play Week 9 again, which I think will have not a more. Yeah, I mean, I guess we'll have more clear picture of what as far as who's in the playoff race. So I think there's going to be some playoff implications there. We'll see how that whole situation shakes out. I think people are. I mean, they're going to be competitive and they should be a playoff team, but I'm wondering if people overrate Tom Brady's value a little bit just at this point in his career. So I'm interested to see where both of those teams stand kind of at the halfway mark. So that's kind of interesting to me as well. And just another comment, I have the Saints several times. I think the Saints are just a really fun team to watch, number one. And number two, I mean, it's highly expected that Drew Brees is going to retire after the season. Maybe. I mean, we said that last season, but
Yeah.
I really think that the Saints are going to win one more for Drew Brees. I mean, I think they're one of the top four teams in the playoffs, and if you can rally around Drew Brees for one more playoff run, they've been through heartbreak the past 3 years in the playoffs, so I really expect them to rally around him and for them to bring home one last championship for him.
And while we're on the topic of the schedule, somebody asked, or Dan asked, what are your thoughts on the NFL doing games on Christmas Day, which is a Friday? And somebody in our group chat actually brought up a good point. The Christmas Day has always been NBA. They have like the top, 6 or 8 teams on or on the schedule for NBA, and it's just all day basketball. That's pretty much the only sport that's going on at the time. I think the NHL usually takes a couple day break, and Christmas usually never falls on, or every 7 years it falls on Sunday, so it's so they don't really get a lot of love on Christmas. But now they're going to be competing with the NBA. What do you think about that, or what do you think about the NFL on Friday in general?
Yeah, I mean, the NBA's had a lot of success on Christmas Day. So, I mean, I'd be interested in Friday night games in general. I think that could be really intriguing to see how that works. But there is some talk that the NBA is going to realign and change the way that they do their scheduling. And it's possible that Christmas Day could kick off the NBA season in the future. Because for a lot of NBA fans, ones that aren't hardcore, that's kind of when the season begins for a lot of them, and they start tuning in for the playoff race a little bit. So, yeah, and I see Dan commented with some dollar signs, but it all comes down to the dollars at the end of the day. I mean, the NFL is a business like anything else, and they're going to do what's in their best interest. I'd be intrigued by it. I mean, obviously, I'm going to watch any game that's on any day, but I'd be interested to see, because they are competing with the NBA. So as far as would they be able to overtake the NBA on Christmas Day, I'd assume so, because the NFL has more fan power than the NBA. But I'm just, you kind of want to avoid your competition. So I'm a little surprised to see that.
And also, we'll see how the NBA schedules their games too. If they try to maybe just avoid that time slot and have during the day games for the NBA, or I don't even know how the NBA or the NFL schedule is for that day. I haven't really looked too far into it, but yeah, we'll see what happens there, and I'm choosing the NFL over the NBA any day of the week, so they could play all 7 days if the CBA allowed them. I would watch it every single day, but my second game that I got, and let me put the camera on me. The second game that I got is the Chiefs at Chargers in Week 2. And I don't think it's going to be too exciting of a game. I'm just it's the Chargers are opening up the stadium for them. Obviously, you already mentioned that the Rams opened it up in Week 1. The Rams really haven't had a problem with attendance since they moved to LA. It's the Chargers that have had the problems, and so it's exciting to see how exactly the fans react to the Chargers in their new stadium, in their new home. The what is it, $4.7 billion stadium, SoFi Stadium, and
Yeah.
we'll see if they could get fans out there. I mean, being out in LA, it's probably going to be a lot of celebrities, a lot of movie stars, a lot of musicians. But yeah, I mean, it's the Chargers. They gotta put some fans in the seats. Hopefully, Justin Herbert could help that out. But yeah, I mean, I'm excited to see like how the fans react to. And it's the Super Bowl champs coming in. That's going to be their first away game. So even if you get some out of town fans or just some Chiefs fans in there or some bandwagon Chiefs fans in there, hopefully we see the stadium full and it's a nice crowd for the Chargers' first home game.
Yeah, and I have another Chiefs game as another matchup I'm interested in, and it's their first matchup with the Raiders in Week 5. And the reason for that is I have the Raiders as a playoff team for this upcoming season. They showed a ton of improvement last year. They've added more offensive weapons. Based on the way that they've been drafting and building their team, it feels like they've been trying to keep up with the offensive firepower of the Chiefs. And this is going to be their first opportunity to really show that. So I'm really interested to see how the Chiefs and Raiders match up. And I don't think that the Raiders have an offense that's as explosive as the Chiefs, but I really want to see when they go toe to toe for the first time.
Yeah, I'm excited to see any kind of Raiders games this year. I think they're another team that's opening up a new stadium too. But I think they're also a playoff team. And Eric, if you're listening and watching, Derek Carr is a good quarterback. The next game I got on here is the Patriots at Bills in Week 8. That's the first game between those two. They play again in Week 16 on Monday night. But this is the first game in the post Tom Brady era. They've in the year that he went down with his ACL injury, obviously he didn't play, and then in 2016, the Bills were on the schedule for one of the first 4 games, so he didn't play in that game either. But like it's real this time. I mean, we're going into the schedule knowing that he's not on the team. There's no injury that's going to stop him from playing. There's no suspension that's going to stop him from playing. We're going into 2009 or 2020 knowing that Tom Brady isn't on the Patriots, and the Bills actually have a chance to take over that division. And with the Jets and the Dolphins being weak, and who knows how Stidham's going to be in the quarterback position there. So I'm just looking forward to see how the fans are, how it is a home game for the Bills. How I'm just looking forward to the post Tom Brady era, and it's going to be exciting.
Yeah, no, and that game kind of feels like it could be a changing of the guard for the division. So I think it's important on a lot of levels, just from a morale standpoint for the Bills. I mean, if they lose their first game to the Patriots in the post Tom Brady era, I mean, that just stings more than a regular loss to the Patriots. So I think that they really are going to have to come out strong that game just to make it really feel like the guards officially changed. Because as much as we all kind of think that, I mean, the Patriots are still the Kings until proven otherwise, in my opinion. So, that has the ability to feel like a changing of the guard. And that kind of transitions into one of my games as well, which also involves the Bills in Week 6. And they are playing the Chiefs. The reason I say that is a lot of people want to see the Bills take that next step up. So I think there's no better way to show that they're taking their team to the next level than beating the Super Bowl champions. I'm not saying that they will, but I think it's a really competitive game. You have a high-flying offense versus kind of really a team that I call stingy, and I think that's the Sean McDermott attitude. So I think that's a good game for them to prove, okay, are they just a playoff team or are they a legitimate Super Bowl contender? And I think you're going to be able to tell right away from that game.
And that's the Thursday night game that week. That's the only game that's on the schedule for that day, and it's also it's at home, and we haven't had a home primetime game in 2 years, I think. And the last time we did, Tom Brady was here. But yeah, I mean,
Thursday night football is not prime time. That game's way too good for Thursday night football.
It's going to show it. It's a top defense against a top offense, and that's going to be fun. I'm going to try to get tickets to that game if I can, but if not, it's going to be fun to watch on TV. My next game, it's a boring game, but I just like the quarterbacks in the game. It's going to be Bengals at Dolphins in Week 13. If the Dolphin season isn't going the way that they want it to go, which obviously they want it to go to the playoffs, Ryan Fitzpatrick, then I could see this being uh, not Tua's first game, but I could see Tua being in this game versus Burrow for the first time in their careers, and so the number one overall pick versus the number five overall pick. Um, I don't think it's going to be a lot of excitement. It's just going to be a lot of storylines, especially if we know who the starters are a couple weeks in advance. They're going to try to build this game up. It's not going to be flexed or anything. It's going to be in the regular 1 o'clock time slot. Probably going to be one of the most boring games on the schedule, but the media is going to hype it up because of the quarterbacks in the game. But I just want to see how those two young players play with their new teams in their rookie year.
Yeah, and I mean, naturally, whenever you have the choice at number one to take one of two quarterbacks, they're going to be compared for the rest of their career. So we'll see who has the better career long term. But yeah, I mean, that's going to be the start of an era. I mean, every year, if Joe Burrow has one bad game, it's going to be, oh, should they have taken Tua? I mean, that's just how the media works. But yeah, and I think that's an interesting game as well. Another one that I have listed here, I guess I'll go to Week 12. I have the Chiefs and Buccaneers. So yeah, Patrick Mahomes versus Tom Brady there. It's once again, I mean, I think a lot of people say this is a Super Bowl preview. I'm a little more hesitant to say that Tampa will find themselves in that good of a position. But, once again, I think it's just going to be a fun game to watch. Two really explosive offenses. It has the better defense between the two teams. So I'd probably honestly give the edge to them. But I think the last time that Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady played was probably in the playoffs 2 years ago. So I think that's going to be an interesting game to watch. And, there's a lot of playoff implications. And I really like to see when two playoff teams face off like that because it really tells you a lot about the character of that team and whether they're just a contender or a pretender.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to say that any game involving Patrick Mahomes is not going to be a game to watch because, like, even if the other quarterback on the other side is Nick Foles or Mitch Trubisky, it's still like you got the whole Chiefs offense and they're just fun to watch. So it's going to be. I think that they're gonna put out another show this year, and I think that they could be repeat champs for the first time since what was it, 2003, 2004, or did the Patriots repeat more recently than that? I don't remember.
No, I think that was the most recent. Yeah.
My final game that I got is Week 16, Vikings at Saints. This could be Drew Brees' last home game. I definitely think they're going to the playoffs too. I think they're going to have some home games in the playoffs. So it was a hard one to say because I think he is going to play more games at home. But if he announces it sometime during the season, or even if all the rumors are true and it is Drew Brees' last season, this is the last home game on his schedule until the playoffs. So I mean, he's going to have. He's going to have the whole New Orleans, the state of Louisiana, and the whole city of New Orleans down there watching them. The Vikings and the Saints, they have a little bit of playoff history together. The Vikings have knocked out the Saints.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit, yeah. The Vikings have knocked out the Saints over the past couple of years, and there's a little bit of bad blood there. They're fun games, but a little bit of bad blood there. This could be for playoff positioning. This could be potentially for the Saints getting the number one seed, or the Vikings trying to stay afloat with the Packers, or even the Vikings grabbing a top two seed there in the NFC. But yeah, I mean, this game. Sorry for the delay. I want to make sure it's not already in the Sunday night game because this is a game that could be flexed into Sunday night if it's not already, and it's not already. No, this is the Christmas game. Okay, well, glad I checked. Okay, this is the Christmas game in Week 16 on at 4:30 in the afternoon. So that game's not moving, but it is going to be a good game.
Yeah, no, I would agree. So let's. Who's your Super Bowl pick?
Ooh, why do you have to ask that question?
Come on, let's go. I want to get it while we're on camera. That's why I don't want us to not be recording.
I'm gonna go with the Chiefs and Saints, and I'm gonna say that the Chiefs repeat. But it's gonna be tough because I want Drew Brees to go out strong, but I think the Chiefs repeat. Who's yours?
I have the Saints and the Ravens. I mean, I'm one of the biggest Lamar Jackson fans on the planet. I loved him before he was on the Ravens. I loved him coming out of college, out of Louisville. So I have a ton of faith in Lamar Jackson, and I just like the way they run their team. They control the clock. They have a good defense, strong run game. So I still think that they're built. I think they kind of gotta. I really wanted to see the Ravens and Chiefs play in the playoffs last year. So it was a little disappointing that the Ravens got knocked out by the Titans. That was very underwhelming, but I think they're going to have a lot to prove this year. I think Lamar has a lot to prove because people just continue to doubt the guy. He won an MVP, had a very successful season, so I still think he has a ton to prove. But I do have the Saints taking it home. I'm a big believer in rallying around a legend like that. You saw Peyton Manning go out with a Super Bowl. You saw the Ravens do it with Ray Lewis. So I'm just a really big believer when you have generational legends like that, that you really rally around a guy like that and you give him one more Super Bowl.
And then last question before we end the show, and I'll answer it too. Besides Vegas, who do you have any other surprise teams that make it to the playoffs? And it's 7 teams this year per conference. Remember that.
Yeah, so I'm going to steal one of the ones that you've mentioned before because I really like them too. You've been a little more outspoken about it than me, but I mean, I really do. I like the Chargers this year. I mean, I agree with your assessment that you've made previously that they could have the number one defense in the NFL. I mean, when you look at their defense, I mean, it is stacked now with Ingram and Bosa, Derwin James, Chris Harris, and Hayward at corner. They added Kenneth Murray to build a really strong linebacking core. I mean, that defense is scary, and that alone, I think, can carry you to the playoffs. I expect Tyrod to start most of this season, and I think when your defense is that good, you just need a quarterback that's not going to make a lot of mistakes. They have weapons on offense. Tyrod is a good decision maker, so I really think that's a team that goes 9-7, maybe even 10-6, and makes the playoffs.
And they're in a tough division, but and I have the Raiders making the playoffs too, and I don't think any of them are topping the Chiefs, so it's going to be hard to see. It would be nice to see if 3 teams from the same division could make it, but it's going to be a 3-team race for second place in that division, and with the Chargers defense and their weapons that they have, Raiders I think are pretty well rounded. They've had 5 picks in the first round the past 2 years with Mike Mayock making those picks, so they're going to get the best out of them. And then the Broncos are just putting together an awesome offense over there. So it's pretty much going to be a battle for the second place in the AFC West, and one of those teams could be the second or the seventh. The seventh wildcard team in that division, but the other 2 teams that I have that are surprises, and I've mentioned them before, are the Arizona Cardinals, also from a tough division. You got the Super Bowl runner-ups in that division, and you got Seattle in that division, and the Rams are just 2 years removed from a Super Bowl appearance. So it's
Super Bowl runner-up back-to-back years.
But yeah, I could see the Cardinals, especially with they've increased that defense a lot. They've upgraded that offense quite a bit. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins alone makes that offense better. They have a pretty solid run game. Kyler Murray's going into his second year. We could see a Lamar Jackson second year or a Patrick Mahomes second year out of Kyler Murray. So, I mean, all the hype is there. We'll just see if he could do it on the field. And then my other team, and this might get some boos, and if you want to boo, you can too. The Detroit Lions. I think that they're going to be. I think they're going to be a solid team. That team runs through Matt Stafford, and with the way that Minnesota is going backwards, at least defensively, they filled up some holes that they lost, but and I think Jefferson is a good replacement for Stephon Diggs. But I don't know. I mean, I think Green Bay still owns that division, even though everybody's given them an F for their draft grade. But they really didn't have a lot of needs, I guess. So they had the opportunity to go out and do the kind of draft that they did, and it shouldn't make a huge difference. I mean, I'm sure everybody wants Aaron Rodgers to have more weapons, fantasy-wise and reality-wise, but they made it to the conference championship last year with almost the same roster that they have right now. But I think that Detroit has Detroit's putting together a pretty good defense. I don't know what your thoughts are on Matt Patricia, but so I mean, and I know coaching is a big thing to you, but they got a pretty solid defense. They got a good offense. They got one of the best, probably the best running back in the draft to pair with Kerryon Johnson if he could stay on the field. A top 10 tight end last year, two pretty solid wide receivers. Actually, three. They got Allison from Green Bay too. So I mean it's a pretty good team. I think if they could all stay healthy and stay together.
Yeah, no, I mean that's an intriguing team to me. I do like Matt Patricia. I think this is a big year for him because I'm still not sure if he's just a really strong defensive coordinator that's really strategic or if he's a head coach that can lead an entire organization. So I think the jury's still out on that one. Another team that I'll just kind of throw out there too that I think is really intriguing to me are the Panthers. I mean, they're only a few seasons removed from being a playoff team each and every season. They made a lot of moves this offseason, and I think they were really strategic. You saw them go out and get Teddy Bridgewater. They surrounded him with weapons. They locked up Christian McCaffrey. Their offensive line should be solid. And then we saw them go out in the draft, and they spent every single draft pick on a defensive player. And I mean, that's not even an exaggeration. They spent every single pick on a defensive player. So I'm going to be interested. I think they have a lot of strong pieces on that defense now. Not that I think they're going to be able to overtake anyone in that division. That's a really strong division, and that's kind of my knock against them right now. You could argue that all four of those teams have playoff potential in that division. So, but I think that's, to me, maybe not a playoff team, but just an intriguing roster. You're going to see how Joe Brady at a young age gets to adjust to the NFL game as a play caller, Matt Rule in his first season as a head coach. So there's a lot of intrigue to me around the Panthers.
I could see the Panthers too. That's another one of those tough divisions with Tampa, Atlanta, and New Orleans there. So with that, we'll end it on that note. Some pretty solid under teams. Panthers have a bad secondary, and you're asking a lot of the young front line to pressure quarterbacks to compensate for their secondary. Yeah, I mean, well, the whole division has a pretty bad secondary and bad defenses, so I mean, anything could happen. They just have to match up the points, which I think they have the offense to do so. So we'll see what happens. But on that note, we're gonna end it. Thank you guys for tuning in. We're here every Tuesday night at 8:30 Eastern to 9:30 Eastern. Sometimes you get some overtime from us, like you did tonight. Make sure you follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/fantasyholics. The website is www.thefantasyholics.com. You can see it right above my head here. And and Twitter is fantasyholics1. So follow us on Twitter. We're tweeting daily, a couple times a day. All of our polls, all of our articles go on Twitter. The website has all of our articles too. So just follow us for all the fun stuff that we talk about. And YouTube is just Fantasyholics. So we made it all easy for you guys. You don't have to type in anything else outside of Fantasyholics. Finish.